Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Good to see you, Faizan. How are things?
Not too bad. Yeah, just calling it a day after this webinar.
Excellent, excellent. What time is it with you now in Dubai? Is it around 8 p.m.,
Ha
9 p.m.?
half past eight, yes.
First day. Okay, almost ready for the evening relaxation. So that sounds good.
Yes.
So thank you for joining. Much appreciated. Hi, Robin. Good to see you as well.
Hello, Aaron. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi. I'm all right, thank you. It's nice to see you. Thanks for coming along. And Trisha, thank you as well for joining.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
How
How are
are you?
things?
It's
I'm
good.
all
It's
right.
good.
Good, good. Is the weather okay over in Atlanta at the moment, or
It is pouring down rain today, so
ah, well,
getting lots of
join the club.
rain.
Apart from
hmm
Faizan in Dubai, I think the rest of us are feeling kind of cold and wintry.
Yeah, it's that wintertime season, so
Certainly
Absolutely
is.
that. I'd prefer to be in Dubai. I think Faizan,
I
I'd
know.
envy this.
Yeah, this for me, this is the best time of the year. It's not, it's supposed to be winters, but it's like 30 degrees,
Oh.
25 to 30.
Uh,
Perfect for a day out at the beach.
Perfect. Perfect.
That sounds very attractive, I must admit. So we had, I think, 14 or 15 people registered. So it may be that they're running a little bit late. So maybe we'll just give it another 60
Sure,
seconds or so, and then we can jump into it.
sure.
Um, but yeah, in terms of the content, it sounds like something that's rather old hat in terms of networking. However, the purpose behind it really is to talk about how it used to exist traditionally and how it's evolved in the age of digital resources, the internet, AI, smarter kind of approaches, if that makes sense. So it'd be interesting to see what people get out of it, come the end of the webinar. So I think we couple of moments in. I'll just check if anyone's in the lobby, and then I think we'll probably get started. I think Andrea's just joined. Hello, Andrea. You muted a moment. Are you there, Andrea?
Hi, Aaron. I'm just getting set up.
Hi. Well, that's okay. Thanks for coming along. Nice to see you again. All right, fantastic. Well, I don't want to keep you lovely people waiting too much longer, so shall we dive into it? And then in any case, there'll be a recording available afterwards anyway. So as we go through, feel free to raise a virtual hand, pop any questions into the chat window, and feel free to throw questions in. Stacey, thanks for joining. Good to see you.
Yes, good to see you. Sorry, I'm running a couple minutes behind, but nice to see you as well.
That's all right. That's all right. We're just doing all the meet and greet stuff. So we'll go ahead and dive into the details. And as I was saying, if anyone has any questions, wants to raise a hand, feel free. So thank you all for joining, for making the time. Today's webinar is entitled Best Practices for Modern Networking. Whereas the subject of January's webinar, if you attended, was focused around Myers-Briggs profiling and how to unlock your hidden assets. So today what I want to do is examine the concept of business networking, and more specifically, how it's evolved in the past 5 years, whilst covering what some might consider a best practice approach. Now, before we dive into the presentation, could I get a virtual show of hands from anyone who has secured either their current role or their most recent role as a result of networking? So we have Faizan, Robin, yeah. Got a few cameras off. Trisha, did you secure yours through networking or?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I had heard of the role and then kind of connected with somebody that had knew the new CHRO and kind of went from there. So yeah.
So I think based on that straw poll, that does go to show the true value of utilizing your network. It's very much alive and kicking. I was just speaking to a friend about half an hour ago who again has been through a pretty tough job search, but through the power of networking, did manage, I think, through a referral and a further referral to secure the next role. So it's good to see that's still working well. Okay, great. So thank you everyone for sharing. Let's now move on with an introductory slide. So I think it's important to start by acknowledging the profound transformation that has taken place in how professionals connect and build relationships. Sounds rather like a pitch for LinkedIn in a sense, but there are two primary drivers for this, in my opinion. So you have globalization and connectivity. The world has become more interconnected, and opportunities now, of course, extend beyond local geographies. You've heard the phrase, the world is a village, and it's very much the case these days. Networking today seems to be about bridging digital gaps rather than just physical ones. I think there's also been a shift in focus where you looked at traditional networking as being event-centric, one-dimensional. It tended to focus on who you could meet in person. Modern network is obviously multi-channel, strategic, and continuous. It tends to leverage digital tools for real-time interaction and long-term engagement. I think the second point to talk about is the impact of technology. So it's important to step back and witness how technology has reshaped networking dynamics. So if you take the rise of LinkedIn, for example, I think personally I joined it around 2008. Seems like a pretty long time ago now. I don't know, again, a quick straw poll. Has anyone joined with LinkedIn from, say, the late noughties or prior to 2010? Just a quick show of hands. Yeah, so a fair few early adopters. And of course, as we know, it's not just a digital resume, it's the hub of professional networking where I think at the last count, 930 million or so users connect, share insights, and engage with opportunities. They do also use it to boast a heck of a lot, but that's a whole other discussion for another time. LinkedIn, as we know, features posts, articles, the ability to comment on others' content, and that's naturally created a new way to interact. Of course, you have virtual events and meetings. They tend to have replaced many traditional in-person meetups. This webinar being a good case in point. Platforms like Zoom, Teams, and Hopin allow professionals to connect with peers globally without leaving their homes. And we saw a particular spike in usage and adoption during the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. Another point, of course, being social media. So platforms like Twitter, Slack, and Discord, we'll all be pretty familiar with those, have all emerged as places for niche communities to gather, especially in tech and creative industries. So we look at the third point and talk about societal shifts post-pandemic. So we should consider how the COVID pandemic altered professional interactions. And these include things like remote working, as we all know, a great point of debate. Networking has shifted to digital first approaches due to the rise of remote and hybrid work environments. It's also the case that building relationships with colleagues and mentors now often happens through virtual channels. You can hear many examples of people joining a new company or role and probably not meeting somebody in the same team, potentially for the first 12, 18 months. It's more and more common. So geographical barriers have diminished. Professionals can now join webinars, virtual conferences, or mentorship programs from anywhere. I do feel now that, contrary to what I was kind of half jokingly saying, there is a greater emphasis now previously than before on authenticity. So I think people are now more interested in genuine, meaningful connections than transactional or superficial relationships. Now that may, create a little bit of a debate in some regards. There is a new culture of ghosting that's kind of being complained about quite a lot of these days. But I think from a quality perspective, there's a greater focus on trying to build deeper relationships. So how do we harness those solutions to overcome traditional barriers? So in terms of positioning networking as a solution here, I think the key point, of course, is why networking is critical in today's competitive job market. So there's a common school of thought which talks about the hidden job market. Now, some interesting stats to share on that. Studies suggest that between 70 and 85% of roles are actually filled through networking rather than formal applications, which is quite an interesting stat to consider in the current climate. Networking also unlocks access to opportunities that are never publicly posted. Certainly, this is the case in my experience working as a headhunter. If we then think about your personal brand and visibility in a particularly crowded market, networking obviously helps to establish your unique value proposition. One of the best tips I could offer is if your LinkedIn profile isn't optimized for your target audience, a well-maintained presence can lead to recruiters and hiring managers approaching you directly. That may not just be for job opportunities, that could also be for thought leadership or speaking opportunities, potentially. I think learning and growth is another key part of this. So it's not just about jobs, it's about gaining industry insights, it's finding mentors, and really trying to stay ahead of trends. So from my observation, gone are the days where the only way you could attend a seminar or hear a TED talk was in person. Millions of people worldwide now have fantastic possibilities of learning from the comfort of their own living room. So a question for the audience, if I may, so I need to probably grab some water quickly, but general question here. When was the last time you leveraged networking for your own professional growth? And that could be in the sense of mentorship, it could be advisory, it could be seeking a mentor, asking the crowd. Could I maybe get a virtual show of hands on that point? Stacey, yeah. Andrea and Alejandro, yeah. And if we could maybe go to Andrea, just on this one, when you were leveraging your network, did you feel confident in your approach, or did it feel more of a challenge to go and ask the question?
I think it depends on the ask. So, for instance, in my last role, I was like seeking different suppliers and yeah, for specific surfaces. So it was a very low ask, I would say, to my network. It was kind of just asking around. I wasn't really necessarily asking them to take much action, except just fill me in of if they know anybody. So that kind of felt like I wasn't asking them to do too much. I wasn't kind of bothering them to that extent because I would have done the same thing and shared my resources with them if they asked me.
Makes sense. So it's a relatively low ask. If you can help me, if you know somebody, that kind of scenario. And did you feel that people were quite willing to help in that case, or was it
Yeah.
kind of difficult to get response?
Yeah, like if it depended on the person and if they were able to share their contacts because it depended on who they worked for, etc. But for the most part, yeah, because if they had a really good relationship, say with a supplier, and it was in competition, like didn't have an issue.
Okay, interesting. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think we have to remember as well, there may be different personality types or profiles that would find that, easy or difficult. The more introverted among us, for example, may generally have a harder time putting themselves out there, in inverted commas. So let's move on to the next topic. Now let's consider the evolution of networking. So as we know, traditional networking was often very event-centric, one-dimensional. It focused on who you could meet in person. Modern networking is much more strategic. People are looking to leverage digital tools. Quite often they're looking to automate as well. So in the old sense, there was generally an over-reliance on business cards. I don't know how many of you remember going around expos or trade shows, handing out cards. Then it became a case of scanning QR codes, and you were put onto these very long mailing lists, of course. Generic cold calling was part of that, attending every networking event, sometimes without a focus or a follow-up strategy. So I think from my perspective back then, networking was more about quantity than quality. And it quite often led to fatigue and minimal results. So if I ask the question, how many of us have drawers full of business cards from conferences that we've never looked at again? The new way, of course, incorporates more strategic use of things like LinkedIn, leveraging shared communities or connections, crafting personalized outreach. Instead of casting a wide net, professionals they tend to focus on specific communities where their expertise is valued. So in my view, it's better to have 10 deep supportive connections than 100 shallow ones. And I do tend to think that a little research and personalization go a long way in creating memorable impressions. So if we think about the rise of visual or virtual networking, how to make it effective, talking about video, naturally it creates a stronger sense of connection than text or audio only calls. It makes sense to follow very basic tips and hints here. So maintain good lighting and a professional background, look at the camera to simulate eye contact. And it goes without saying, in a digital first world, showing your face is like shaking hands. It then tends to build trust and familiarity. Now, I don't know how many of you are quite often leveraging LinkedIn events or webinars to interact with industry experts. But of course, part of the evolution of networking has been to identify virtual panels that are hosted by industry leaders, those that are regarded as experts or inspirational thought leaders. Rather similar to this webinar, you can use the chat feature or Q&A sessions to go ahead and ask insightful questions. So as an example, I can think of a software engineer who attended a virtual panel on AI ethics a couple of months ago. He engaged directly with the speaker during the Q&A, and that single interaction actually led to a mentorship opportunity. So And it pays not to underestimate the power of showing up and participating. It does signal your interest and enthusiasm. So with that all in mind, let's move on to what tends to work today. So first of all, it goes without saying that your online presence is often your first impression. And in many cases, whether someone's sent you an email, you've heard their name, you've witnessed them speaking on a stage, people tend to look you up online before they even speak with you. So on that basis, it's critically important to stand out in today's digital first professional environment. So my advice would always be to start with a strong headline and to use something more descriptive than just a job title, for example. So marketing specialist driving growth through data-driven strategies. And then if you're looking at the about section, there should be some compelling ingredients in there as well. So focus on your achievements, your passions, your career goals. For example, you may say something like, I thrive at the intersection of data analysis and creative problem solving, delivering measurable results in complex markets. So I think the visual elements are key. So ensure that you're using a professional headshot, a relevant background image, and try to incorporate media links to projects or presentations as appropriate. I do often bore people to tears, unfortunately, with the concept of storytelling and creating a narrative that really conveys and distills your unique value proposition. And how does that translate into your LinkedIn section? Well, there is always a featured section where you can highlight key achievements, so things like articles, portfolio pieces, or certifications. So I think fundamentally, try to think of your LinkedIn profile as your personal website. What it should do is answer who you are, what you've done, and where you're going. Another thing that's often really worth kind of looking at and focusing on is engaging in relevant posts, articles, and groups. So it does make sense to comment on posts with meaningful insights or questions. I often tell people it's worth sharing articles that resonate with your field and include a personal take on why they're important. So quite a lot of the time, it makes sense if you're involved in a certain area or interest to join relevant LinkedIn groups that are related to your industry so that you can connect with peers and participate in discussions. I think the key part in today's job market, where we are right now, is to be very proactive. Engagement is just about starting conversations, not just consuming content. So don't be afraid to dive in and offer your opinion. So going back to the point about building authentic relationships, I do believe it's quite important to take an element of personalization in initial outreach. One thing to try and avoid, of course, is transactional conversations. So always try to focus on mutual value. It is important, even if your real reason is to pursue a lead or a job or a sale, it is important to try and shift the narrative from transactional to meaningful networking. So essentially, it isn't really any more about how many people you meet. It's about how well you nurture those relationships. So I'm going to just take a pause there and let Robin come in. So you've raised your hand, Robin. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Aaron, thanks. I just wanted to make a brief comment because I wanted to support what you're saying there about, LinkedIn in effect as being the primary digital online marketplace for networking, particularly in the sort of job seekers and the career world. But I think it's really important that we view it as a shop window, and that the really important thing here is to get people into the shop, in effect. So how do you then build the personal relationship? So, I think it's right, build authentic relationships. But what I'm encouraging people to do as well is to move off of LinkedIn as quickly as possible. So use LinkedIn as the start point to build the connection, share the mutual interest, get some great conversation going through comments, through posts, but as quickly as possible, build the person to person. Needn't be in person. It can still be, global across continent, but actually having that personalized conversation really strengthens that relationship. So I just wanted to sort of chip that in at this stage, Aaron, just in terms of a personal perspective on LinkedIn.
I think that's absolutely right. And the sooner you can translate that digital interaction into a personal interaction makes a great deal of sense. I'm a great advocate of Calendly, and I'm not an affiliate or on commission or anything like that, but I tend to really value something like that automates that kind of administrative process and takes you through to that conversation, generally over a video conversation, could be in person. I think the other kind of key to it, we were just talking about focusing on mutual value. So instead of immediately asking the other person for something, offer value up front. So that could be, I saw this and thought of you. Here's an interesting article you might wish to read. There's somebody I thought you should connect with. Let me, broker an introduction, or maybe provide feedback on their work. Something positive like, I read an article you published, or I witnessed you speaking at an event. So when you focus on giving before receiving, of course, the idea is to set the tone for a lasting positive relationship. And a point to this is diversification. So as you rightly said, Robin, LinkedIn tends to be the central focal point. I don't want to use the word monopoly, but in a sense, it is the kind of central repository where most people go. So if you think about diversifying your networking channels, professional associations may be one example, industry-specific Slack groups, virtual conferences, and meetups. These are all examples of less conventional yet effective networking strategies and locations. So it shouldn't really be a case of networking is confined to LinkedIn. Your industry likely has hidden communities where valuable connections do happen. So what I'd like to do is now maybe set up a quick poll for you all. And I'd like to just understand which of these networking channels you're already using effectively. So I was going to talk about three. I was going to talk about Slack, which is more of an internal communications channel, LinkedIn, of course, and Twitter. So I don't know whether you would mind just popping something in the chat that says which of these. I'm guessing you may be using all three, but if there are any that you aren't, feel free to put something in the chat. It'd be good to get a sense to guide the conversation that which networking channels are being used. Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Fatah. SHR. Fantastic. There's no Stacey that we've talked quite a lot about the association, and there are regular meetups and interesting speakers coming through. Maybe you can share a little bit more about what happens in those events.
Yes. So with SHRM, which is the Society of Human Resources Management here in Denver, Mile High SHRM, I should say, there are so many opportunities to network, go to training, go to happy hours. The conference is coming up next week. And so I do. I'm on the board as well, so I do go to quite a bit. But I'll give you an example. In early January, we had our kickoff happy hour, and just, meet, greet, talk to folks. And I spoke to someone who I'd never met before that is interested in AI. And so we're looking for speakers for the AI forum that's in October this year. So we just had some general conversation, which was very easy because, it was relevant. But then that led into, just kind of talking about, if you hear of any consulting opportunities or that are more fractional, et cetera. So planting those seeds back in January, he's now following up with me, mid-February-ish and saying, hey, let's meet for coffee. So we already met face-to-face. And now, it's leading into that, let's meet for coffee and talk a little bit further. I want to bounce around some ideas. And so I don't know, I'm fortunate in that there's lots of opportunities to just connect as you have time, and whether it's in person or virtual. And then I just call it planting seeds, because even if in that moment it doesn't come to fruition, a month later, 2 months later, there's something else that can happen to continue to build that connection. So
there's real value in that, isn't there? And there's no real science to how long it may be when you trace it back to that first interaction to the point when it suddenly turns into a collaboration or an opportunity or a project, whatever it may be. But the value is inherent in that. Very, very interesting. Faizan, let's come to you. You've raised your hand as well.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Let me just have a quick intro. My name is Faizan Ramzan. I'm based in Dubai. I work as an IT manager for a HR consultancy. It's lovely to see everyone. This is my first webinar. Thankfully, Aaron reached out to me. I would just like to take a minute and talk about what Aaron just mentioned about LinkedIn and what Robin just, on Robin's comments. I've been on LinkedIn for many years, but never been actively using it. I've only started using LinkedIn aggressively for the past 2 months, and I've seen it grow to where it is, and I've realized it's such a powerful tool. Most of us are maybe not utilizing, all the features of LinkedIn. What Aaron was mentioning about having a good presence in LinkedIn, your picture. I came across a learning video from LinkedIn which tells you exactly how it's called. I think the fundamentals of building your voice, or something similar. It tells you exactly what you should be doing, starting from your picture to your keywords about you. And then it talks about your post, how your post should be, articles, what are the benefits. I was surprised to learn that if you post twice in a week, your views go into 5 times more. So I was totally, surprised with the power of LinkedIn and what it has, come up to. And I am totally on LinkedIn now. But I also totally agree with Robin. This is your point where you meet people, um, introduction, and then like how we are meeting everyone here. And then I think that face to face is a different story. I usually, when I see someone with um, interesting profile, or an ex-colleague I'm seeing after years on LinkedIn, I would straight away say, hey, let's go for a coffee or lunch. And that's how I rebuild relationship with ex-colleagues or someone new.
Mm. No, it's great example and great reinforcement of the point about where you translate that into meaningful human interactions, and then you go ahead and cement that over coffee or over further interactions, whatever they may be. It's quite an interesting story how Robin and I actually came into contact, although we're both in kind of swimming in similar waters, as it were. Robin originally studied at the Royal College of Music and played in an orchestra, and I have some interests and some publications around classical music. So our initial kind of interaction was related to that, nothing to do with the world of HR or executive coaching. And it kind of blossomed into, I'd like to say a friendship and also, some collaboration opportunities. So it is really quite interesting. I think the key is to keep an open mind, look for opportunities, leverage the power of LinkedIn, learn how the algorithms work, and then look to nourish and develop those relationships. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Robin.
Look, I think that's great. Thanks for sharing that story. I think it's great to build a point of personal connection, and in a way, it doesn't really matter what it is, but it transcends the sort of the transactional work related piece and just build something more of an interpersonal point of connectivity, and that's the start of a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I would probably summarize this particular section in terms of takeaway. Networking today is all about strategy. When you combine a strong digital presence, authentic relationships, and diversified channels, you tend to open yourself to opportunities you may not have thought possible, and potentially, very, very kind of productive relationships down the line. So what are the common pitfalls and how do you avoid them? Or what would be the best approach? Let's go to Stacey before we dive into that. Go ahead, Stacey.
I was just going to add one more thing, which was when you were talking about surprising and cultivating different relationships. Another one that just happened recently is at SRSA, where I was previously, I worked with a outside contracting company called developers.net. And so they focus on nearshore contractors, Mexico, Dominican Republic, but it's all nearshore. We're connected on LinkedIn. And so we talk back and forth here and there. How are things going? And so it's actually led to a conversation that happened. What is today? I guess today's Wednesday. On Monday, where because of the network that I have with the professional services organization with SHRM, they want to partner and basically, hey, if you find any clients that are looking for nearshore contractors, send them our way. And in turn, this is what we can do. And so, it's going to hopefully lead to something down the road. It could be, 6 months down the road. But if there is anyone looking for nearshore contractors, let them know about developers.net. If they sign an MSA, then there you go. There's a working relationship that developed. And so, yeah, so those connections are important and maintaining them. So even when you move from one organization to another, keeping that LinkedIn network with folks you've worked with in the past can lead to opportunities. So, yeah. Just wanted to
Absolutely.
reinforce that.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very good and very valid point. And I can think of recent, I'm thinking in the last 3 to 6 months, relationships where the last contact may have been quite some time back, 10 years back, 15 years back, say, oh, okay, it's good to be reconnected, in terms of what's happening right now. And that again has led to a completely new opportunity. Whereas if you go back, myself and the other person were in completely different scenarios, so parallel paths and serendipity is part of that. Robin, let's bring you back in.
Yeah, just building on that previous point, I think one of the key learnings that I've experienced in my career is that when I'm in a role, as it were, I tend to lose sight of networking externally. And I think that that's a real risk for leaders and for professionals. Because what happens then is you exit a company, you look for your next job, you're thinking about what to do next, and suddenly networking goes to the top of your agenda again. And I think it's really important to build those connections that are lasting and meaningful throughout your career, rather than in sort of fits and starts when you tactically need them, if that makes sense. So think of networking as a strategic activity that crosses multiple years and actually really looks towards the sort of future vision for your career, rather than just to tactically gain your next job or your next opportunity.
That's a very valid point indeed. Keep the network sharp, stay in contact, keep the relationships fresh, offer help to others as well, to kind of keep the relationships mutually beneficial, as it were. So I think that's a very, very good point. And not everybody is doing that, quite often out of being too busy or too distracted, too focused elsewhere. But it really does pay dividends to do just that. So thank you for that. That's a very good point. So I think if we look at the common pitfalls, so what are the things that are best avoided, and how do we avoid those common missteps in networking? So even with the best intentions, certain networking habits can work against us. And of course, recognizing these pitfalls is the first step to becoming more effective. So let's run through them. So if we think about overloading others with information, and I think maybe we all know someone that we would say is like this, or we're guilty ourselves to a degree. And whether you're sharing too much about yourself or your work in an initial conversation or message, it can overwhelm the recipient. So for example, a 500 word LinkedIn message that details your entire career history. People are busy. They value concise information. They prefer focused messages. So maybe the best way to look at this, controversially, perhaps, but think of networking like a first date. Don't unload your life story all at once. Instead, share enough to spark curiosity. So I think the other point to this, and we all, what's the phrase, pitch slapped, is it? We all get a lot of messages through LinkedIn, which are, hi, I'd like to connect with you, but there's no personalization. There's nothing really around it in terms of context. And it tends to come across as insincere, instantly forgettable. So if you compare a generic message that says, I'm reaching out to grow my network, versus the personalized one, hi Faizan, I saw your post about career transitions. Your advice on leveraging soft skills was spot on, and I'd love to connect to learn more. So you can tell the instant difference. So generic messages are effectively networking spam, but personalized messages show more effort. They increase your chances of a positive response. I think the third point, being too aggressive in follow-ups, it's something that we again see evidence of. So sending multiple follow-ups in quick succession or pressuring someone for a response, it can feel intrusive, and of course, naturally, it can damage your credibility. So I think following up, 3 times in a week without giving the other person time or space to respond is clearly a no-no. So consider it instead to be based on the concept of building trust, not creating urgency, follow up with patience and respect for the other person's time. So how can you be memorable without overstepping the boundaries? So we've obviously talked about what not to do. Let's focus on maybe how you can turn this into a more positive. So I think the key points around this are to be clear and concise in your messaging. So when you do reach out, get to the point quickly and highlight mutual benefits. For example, hi Alejandro, I'm impressed by your work on AI and logistics. I'm exploring similar applications and I would appreciate your insights. Could we schedule a quick 15-minute chat? So clear, focused, respectful of time. That's far more likely to get a response. Another point, of course, is focusing on value-driven conversations. So offering something valuable as I mentioned before, such as sharing a resource, an article, or a connection. I recently came across this report, Stacey, on supply chain optimization. I thought you might find it useful. So when you lead with value, people are much more likely and inclined to engage and reciprocate. And going back a little bit to what we were saying before, being genuine, showing interest in others, make the conversation about them rather than yourself. Ask thoughtful questions to show your interest. As example, I saw your keynote at last month's webinar. How did you develop such a compelling narrative around AI ethics? Very, very curious to learn more. So authenticity is memorable. It feels more genuine, and it's much more likely that people will help you when they feel that you genuinely care. And of course, naturally, space out the follow-ups. So I don't know how many people here are using automation tools. For example, something like a Dripify. Those that are in business development or marketing flavored roles probably are, but it makes sense to give at least 7, 8, 9, 10 days between follow-ups, unless there's an urgent reason to reach out sooner. And when you do message follow-ups, just keep it polite and concise. Be respectful of their time. If this isn't the best time to reach out to you, Stacey, please let me know. I'll be happy to reach out later. So I think the positive side of that, if we flip that around, polite persistence spaced out over time tends to demonstrate professionalism and respect for the other people's priorities. So I don't feel anyone's brave enough to put their hand up, but I'd be interested to hear an example of maybe a networking message that someone has sent or received, which they found very effective in terms of the outcome. Or maybe they were approached and they thought that was a really excellent approach. I didn't feel pressurized or disrespected. I was listened to. Would anyone have an example they would like to share? There's lots of people that have been pitch slapped here, are there? I don't know.
Well, I've got a few over the past couple of years. Because I work for HR consultancy, a lot of people tend to think that I'm a recruiter. So I tend to get a lot of messages for jobs. But yeah, I make sure, as I said, I have not really been very active on LinkedIn. So you'll probably see a message just sent to me like a month ago. But I always make sure that I reply to them saying, hey, if you want to apply to my company, please go to the website. I'm not a recruiter, so I may not be in a good position to, I very genuine and tell them, I'm in IT, I'm not HR, but I do get a lot of them. But I see their point where they're coming from. I mean, they have to try to, get hold of someone. I mean, I have no issues with that. It's just that if you have so many, then you can, as with your busy schedule, if you're not active on LinkedIn, it may turn out to be rude, but the actuality is that you're not getting enough time, or you're not spending enough time on LinkedIn to reply to each one of them.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And as you say, there's an element of empathy in your answer there, which is to put yourself in the shoes of the business developer.
Yeah.
They have to be quite creative in terms of how to capture attention whilst being polite and balancing urgency and all the rest of it. So I think my kind of takeaway is if you combine clear communication with genuine interest, thoughtful follow-ups, you will ideally leave a lasting impression without overstepping boundaries. But of course, it is a very fine art, I think. So with all of that in mind, that the question you may be asking or curious around is how then could Orbis Jaeger help you as an individual or a corporation? And that means whether you're navigating a career transition or trying to find a new path forward, or perhaps you know someone who knows exactly where they want to go, but they need some help in navigating the necessary steps that are required to secure that promotion or capture that position in their dream organization. So when I set up the business last year, I was finding that there were a significant proportion of conversations I was having on a pretty much daily basis that revolved around concerns like, I don't know where I want to get to, or I know where I want to get to, but I can't seem to capture the essence of my unique value proposition effectively. Or I'm securing plenty of interviews, Aaron, but I just go to pieces when I'm sitting in front of the panel. And all of that painstaking preparation goes out of the window. So a problem that has been exacerbated by one of the most challenging job markets in living memory did require some kind of solution without reinventing the wheel. So I sought to leverage all my years of experience as a headhunter, running complex pressurized searches, dealing and negotiating on behalf of professionals of various personality types the world over. and tried to really scope out and refine a career advisory service that's proven to deliver positive and impactful changes to those individual journeys. So what's emerged from that is what I would kind of describe as a holistic and personalized service, which tries to shift the angles that are involved in helping the individual to identify not only their unique story and value add, but where they will ultimately perform best and achieve fulfillment in their chosen career path. So, from my perspective, I don't believe in taking a generic approach, and if I may say so, neither should you. So, given the kind of changes we're witnessing in the world order, the tectonic plates shifting from a geopolitical perspective in terms of AI technology, it goes without saying those who fail to adapt or refuse to confront the reality of those shifts are going to be left behind. So my conclusion on all of that is if you find yourself at an important juncture and you need to declutter the fog of confusion in your brain, August Jaeger is a company that you can talk to about those solutions. Interesting to reveal as well, Robin and I have been doing some work together in terms of collaboration on the executive coaching side. So Robin, if you wanted to come in and offer a few comments around that and how you would position these services, be more than welcome to add your thoughts.
Well, I think, just building on what you're saying, I think that we're working with a number of executives going through career transition and navigating the uncertainty of a fairly tough jobs market is proving to be quite powerful. So I think that support, whether it's in terms of the LinkedIn optimization or a more sort of in-depth coaching facility, can be really quite useful. So just something to consider there. Or if you know anybody who's going through that sort of form of transition themselves, worth thinking about and having that conversation.
And if anyone is interested, or again, there's someone that you know in your network that may benefit from a complimentary 20-minute session without further obligation, you can scan the QR code on screen, and assuming everything works correctly, that should take you to a booking page. So are there any questions before we move on to the final slides, guys? I'm conscious that we're running a little over the prescribed time, so apologies if we're kind of causing any major issues there. No questions? Okay. All right, fantastic. Well, in that case, I'd like to offer you a free gift for what it's worth. So I don't like anyone to attend one of my webinars and leave empty-handed. So if you have found today's topic insightful anyway, I have put together a downloadable PDF guide, which reinforces some of the best practices around networking that we discussed today in a more encapsulated, concise form. So feel free to scan that. If you're unable to scan it, but you would like a copy, just drop me a line and I will send a copy across to you. Other than that, do stay tuned for an email that contains a link to the recording of today's webinar, which I hope you all found useful. I truly appreciate you all taking the time to connect. It's a pleasure to see you all. And what I'd like to do in the last couple of moments is now to open up the floor and invite any questions or any feedback, or even if there are any challenges that you may be facing, specifically in regard to networking or advice around best practices. So feel free to raise a hand. I think everyone's okay. All right. Fantastic. Well, listen, guys, it was. Oh, okay.
Aaron, the only thing I was going to mention, and this is, I don't know if this is exactly what you were just asking about, but the one thing that I'm finding is that there are some part-time roles that are out there, and which are very good. It's just that normally most of us need to be full-time, and so I wish the market was better for fractional roles, and so that's one thing that I'm definitely interested in, whether it's consulting or in HR, but more fractional roles. And so I know the market specifically here in Denver isn't the best for that, but do you know of any markets that are better, that offer more fractional, like director level and above roles?
It kind of comes back to the leveraging your network piece. So there are obviously certain things you can do in terms of drawing up very targeted lists and creating personalized outreach. But I think a lot of this comes back to the hidden jobs. So it might well be that certain things you will probably only hear about them or hear about them being created through a direct conversation or an introduction or a recommendation. So there are certain apparatus that you can leverage, beyond the network. So that may be something we could talk about offline if that would be useful for you. But yeah, I recognize the difficulties. I think it seems to be the case right now that it's very, very tough. From a kind of an individual perspective, we anticipated and observed some positive signs of uptick, probably start of January, and it seemed as though a lot of the indicators were that things were slowly improving. However, having said that, in the last week or so, there have been another round of layoffs at some major corporations. So it's a tough time, isn't it, Rob?
Can I just chip in very quickly on that one, Stacey, as well, and say, because I'm from the world of HR and HR management as well, I think fractional work in HR is relatively immature compared to other professions. Because if you look at, for instance, the world of finance, fractional work seems to be very well entrenched and very mature.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot, but I think it's developing in the HR profession globally. I'd love to explore that with you, if we get an opportunity to talk, because I think there are networks, there are forums, there are opportunities for global part-time and fractional HR. And it's starting to happen. Maybe something you and I can take, through Aaron, we could take offline as a conversation.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
It'd be a pleasure. No problem. We'll drop you a line afterwards. Other than that, thank you all so much. I appreciate you kind of staying an extra 10 minutes. But I hope you found that useful. It was great to get some input there and see, where people are up to. And if there are any questions at all that you'd like to follow up with, please feel free. We will intend to be coming back with a webinar in March, and that'll be on the subject of a mechanism called the Game-Changing Index, which is used to perform certain kind of psychometric functions. So that should be quite an interesting topic for a number of you. So stay tuned for an announcement on that. Other than that, we'll wish you a very pleasant rest of your day, and thank you for joining.
Have a good evening and good morning, everyone.
Thanks,
everybody.
you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
All the very best.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.